Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to talk about care for your sunflowers in the late summer and how to keep them flowering for as many months as possible right up until the first frosts. So this is part of my video series about sunflowers. This is one of the last videos as this is coming towards the end of the year now. So this is going to be focusing mainly on multi-stem flowering varieties like this one here, but it will apply a little bit also to the single stem flowering varieties such as this one over here as well. So when it comes to looking after the sunflower at the end of the year, it's quite similar as the middle of the summer to begin with. What you want to be doing is giving it lots of high nitrogen, make sure it's very well staked, but the staking becomes a lot more important at this time of year. If you want to see more detail about staking, I've made a whole video about that. But basically at the end of the year the plant is going to be at its largest size, and in most places of the world that's also when you get the worst storms as it comes into autumn time. So you really need to make sure that it's well staked. And if it's a multi-stem variety, you're going to have a much more surface area, and there's a real risk of the branches snapping off or the whole thing coming down. So you need to make sure it continues to be well staked. And when it comes to feeding, you want to keep with a high nitrogen feed until you see the final lot of bud setting. So basically what will happen in a multi-stem variety such as this one here is you'll have one flower that starts at the top, which was just up here a few weeks ago. What then happens is that flower finishes, and then all the side branches grow out. Each side branch, such as this one here, will have one flower at the top. Then when this is finished, it will start creating side branches like this one up here has done, and those side branches will also have flowers. Now it's possible that those secondary side branches can also have their own side branches, so you can have up to 3 lots of flowers on one side branch technically. So you can have easily hundreds of flowers on one plant if you have the correct variety and it's looked after in the right way. So what you're wanting to do is keep feeding it a high nitrogen feed until the first lot of side branches have their flower buds. The secondary side branches that come off don't usually have many leaves. If you're just getting ones like this with flower buds coming up but not any leaves, then it's time to switch to a high potassium feed to help the flowers to grow better. So switch to a tomato feed. If you find that some of your side branches do have a lot of leaves on them, most of them don't, but sometimes you might get ones with leaves, then I would just stick with the high nitrogen feed. The reason for that is the high nitrogen feed, it makes the plant feel like it's doing well. If it's starting to run out of nitrogen, what it will do is it will try and flower earlier, and it will reduce the amount of vegetative growth. What you want to do is increase the amount of leaves for as long as possible, because once the sunflower starts flowering and it stops making leaves, it can't then gather any more energy. Also, when it starts flowering and it's producing less leaves, what can happen is a lot of the side shoots, to say, will produce flowers and they won't produce any leaves. That means there's no nodes for potentially more side shoots. So you can see in this one here, you've got some leaves coming through. Because there's some leaves on this one, there's actually some little shoots right in the base there, and those little shoots have potentials for another set of flowers. So continue with the high nitrogen for as long as possible, but once the plant has decided it's not going to make any more leaves, there's no point trying to give it more nitrogen because it's not going to be able to use it. So then it's time to switch to tomato feed. So when it comes to the single varieties, it's similar. You want to continue with a high nitrogen feed for as long as possible, but then once you see the flower buds starting to form, then you go to tomato feed, and so you can get those giant heads. Now some varieties of singles can still produce secondary flowers. That you can see this one here, it has produced that large flower head, but it's actually got a secondary flower coming. I'm just going to leave this one as I'm going to collect the seeds from it, but if I was to cut the flower head off from that, it would encourage those secondary flowers to develop better and I'd get another flush of flowers. If I leave it as it is now, those secondary flowers, 1 or 2 might develop, but that will be about it. If I cut that main head off, we'll probably get about 5 or 6, maybe 10 flowers developing. So the most important aspect when it comes to continuing the flowering for your sunflower is actually deadheading. So what the sunflower wants to do is it wants to flower and set as many seeds as possible. But when it produces the seeds, it's putting a huge amount of energy into the seeds, and that's sacrificing energy which could be going into new growth of stems, leaves and flowers. So you want to make sure you keep taking off the flowers as they mature, because once the sunflower realizes it's not producing any seeds, it'll try and produce more flowers so that you can get seeds in the future. So what you want to do is as soon as the sunflowers are starting to go over, deadhead them. So the earlier you deadhead them, the better. It's fairly obvious when they're ready. So this one, for example, the petals are falling off. That's obvious, that needs cutting off so that the seeds don't keep setting. This one here is a little less obvious, and what you want to actually do is get them at this stage or slightly earlier for the maximum number of flowers. So this here, you can see it still has all its petals, but if you look at the flowers themselves, So it's a bit complicated, but basically this is made out of 100 different flowers and the petals are just around the outside. The flowers themselves are these tiny little bits in here, and underneath each flower it's an individual seed. So what happens is over time these flowers open up, and that's why you see the bumblebees going around the center of the flower here, because of individual flowers. It's not actually just one giant one. What they do is they open up and they mature from the outside in. So if I go to one of the younger flowers, such as this one here, the individual flowers on the inside, you can see these are still like a tight spiral and they haven't opened up fully. These ones in the bottom have opened up and they're finishing. So you can tell the age of the flower by that. So this one here is quite young. This one is a little bit older, as you can see from the center there. The center hasn't fully opened up, but these ones have. This one's a bit older again. This is a good stage to start cutting off the flowers, because once the last flowers have fully opened, then all the energy from the plant will start fattening up the seeds. And once you get to this stage here, you can see there's bumblebees in the middle, because that's where the only open flowers are left. You can see these are active flowers because there's little tips of pollen on the outside which are yellow. So this is the perfect stage. This is going to start dropping its outer petals soon, and it will then start putting all the energy into the seeds. So at this stage you want to cut it off before it starts dropping the petals, because once it gets to the stage like the one up there where the petals are falling off, it's already been putting a lot of energy into those seeds for the last few days, and so you're going to find that you're going to suppress some of the flowers which could have come on plant later on in the year. So leaving the flowers on, not only will it slow down the growth of the new flowers that are coming, but it will reduce the overall total number of flowers that you'll get. So you want to make sure that you take them off as soon as possible. That way your sunflowers should be able to continue growing right until the end of the year. Now it is important that you have the right variety to grow a long growing sunflower. If you have a dwarf variety, they're most likely going to go over quite early. If you have a giant variety, particularly a branched multi-stem variety, then they can keep going right up until the frost. So I have quite a short growing season in my part of the world. These sunflowers only go out around April-May time, and they normally finish September to November depending on when the frosts are. But you could prolong your growing season well over 6 months, maybe 10 or 12 months if you're in the right growing conditions. So one way that I do it for me is I start as early as I can with my sunflowers with a little bit of protection from the frost, and then in the late stage of the year it's the same. I want to make sure these are protected from frost. So this one's a bit large for me to do it with, but if you can, you want to cover it with horticultural fleece when you have cold nights. If your plants are too large and you can't do that, like mine, what I do is I put it in a location where I know it's not going to be as susceptible to frost. So this here on the corner of the house, it gets a bit of protection because there's a bit of heat coming off the building at night time. There's a lot of concrete around the base as well, which also helps with keeping the temperature up slightly. Even if it's just providing 1 or 2 degrees warmer than the rest of the garden, it means that this might be able to survive a few more weeks of frost than the rest of the plants in my garden. So that's one thing you want to do, is make sure that it's in a sheltered location that's not going to get too much frost, so you can really extend the season. Because these will keep going until the frost hits. If you do all the things with the right feeding and the pruning and the keeping them secured, they'll just keep going and going. So this one, for example, it's now mid to late September, around about 20th of September today. This has got a lot more flowers that come on it, and I've had ones grow and flower and continue growing even in low light levels here in North Scotland right up until the end of November. So that's all for this video. Just a quick video to say how to keep your sunflowers flowering for as long as possible. The main thing is deadhead them as much as you can to make sure they don't set seed. Second thing is make sure they're well fed with high nitrogen feed, and then switch to tomato feed right at the end of the year when it looks like they're not going to grow any more leaf material or stems. And then you also want to make sure they're well secured, because the strong winds are really going to cause them to fall over and lose limbs at the end of the year. And you want to give them a microclimate or some kind of horticultural fleece covering to protect them from the worst of the frosts. So that's all for this video. If you're interested in any more giant sunflower videos, I've got a whole series on YouTube. I'll put up a playlist that you can watch about all the different aspects of growing the tallest, largest possible sunflowers.